My daughter said at her wedding when she was introducing the guests, "That's my dad. Old and ugly. I am glad I don't look like him in any way." Everyone laughed, including my wife. I didn't react. I just stood up and left the venue. What happened next was rather unbelievable. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Stephen Watson. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. I had always imagined that my daughter's wedding would be the crowning moment of my fatherhood, the day when every sleepless night, every double shift, every sacrifice I had made for her education, her comfort, and her future would feel worth it. I worked myself raw to make sure she never went without, even when it meant I did. And as I sat in that hall surrounded by family, friends, and strangers dressed in finery, I felt the familiar weight of pride pressing on my chest. My little girl, my only child, was walking into her new life, and I was supposed to be the anchor that steadied her before she sailed away. I was nervous, but it was the kind of nervous that comes from love, from knowing you are handing over a piece of your soul to another family. The hall was glowing with chandeliers, and the air carried the faint sweetness of lilies arranged at every table. Music swelled, glasses clinked, and chatter rolled like a wave across the room. People smiled at me with that knowing look, the father of the bride. My suit, though simple, felt heavy with the meaning of the day. My wife sat next to me, her smile brighter than I had seen in years. For a brief, fleeting moment, I thought to myself, this is it, the moment I'll hold on to until the day I die. My chest swelled, and I straightened my shoulders, ready to bask in the rare reward of being honored, respected, and maybe even thanked in public by the very child I had dedicated my life to raising. When the time came for her to introduce her family, my heart beat a little faster. I expected some simple words, nothing elaborate. Maybe a "this is my father, the man who raised me," or even just "this is dad." I wasn't greedy. I didn't crave a speech or grand recognition. I only wanted the kind of acknowledgement that made every father feel like the foundation of their daughter's success. She had already spoken warmly of her in-laws, her bridesmaids, and even her co-workers. Then her eyes landed on me, and her lips curved into a smirk that should have warned me of what was about to happen. "This is my dad," she said into the microphone, her voice clear, confident, and playful. Then, without hesitation, she added, "Old and ugly. I'm glad I don't look like him in any way." The room erupted with laughter, rolling like thunder around me. I froze, the sound hitting my ears as if I had been slapped across the face. I tried to tell myself I misheard, but there was no mistaking it. The words had been sharp, deliberate, and designed for amusement at my expense. I sat there, my pride draining away, replaced by a humiliation so sharp it burned. My hands curled into fists under the table as I felt every pair of eyes dart toward me. What cut the deepest wasn't even her words. It was the laughter. Everyone laughed. The guests laughed, her new husband laughed, and even my wife, the woman who had shared my struggles and my sacrifices, laughed. She covered her mouth as if to soften the sound, but it was too late. She had joined in. And in that instant, I realized I was the butt of the joke at my own daughter's wedding. My chest tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. The proud father image I had been clinging to shattered into pieces I couldn't gather back up. My dignity was dragged into the center of that stage, and my daughter crushed it with her heel. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I didn't even force a smile. I just sat there, still as stone, while the laughter echoed. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, drowning out everything else. I looked at my wife, searching for her eyes, hoping for a shred of solidarity, but she avoided me, pretending to adjust her dress, still smiling faintly, as if nothing had happened. That was the moment something inside me snapped, not with fury, but with clarity. I wasn't welcome in the space I had worked so hard to provide. I wasn't respected in the role I had poured my life into. I was just a prop in her performance, a target for her mockery, and my wife had allowed it. Slowly, deliberately, I pushed my chair back. The sound of it scraping the floor drew some curious glances, but no one stopped me. I stood, buttoned my jacket with trembling hands, and walked toward the exit. I didn't look back. I didn't wave or make an excuse. I simply left. Every step away from that hall felt like I was peeling off another layer of expectation, another illusion I had clung to. Outside, the night air was cool, and the music from the hall was muffled by distance. I stood under the faint glow of the street lamp, staring at my shoes, feeling the weight of decades pressing down on me. My own daughter had reduced me to a joke, and everyone had agreed with her. I waited there for a long time, listening to the faint hum of the city beyond, trying to calm the storm inside me. Humiliation mixed with anger, and anger gave way to a strange, cold numbness. I thought of all the birthdays I had scraped together to buy her gifts she wanted, the times I worked late to make sure she had tuition money, the way I skipped meals so she never had to feel hunger. And for what? So she could stand on a stage and call me old and ugly in front of the very people I had spent weeks paying for, feeding, and entertaining? That wasn't just a joke. That was a betrayal of every ounce of love I had given her. When I finally walked to my car, I didn't feel like a father anymore. I felt like a fool. The pride that had warmed me at the start of the evening had frozen into bitterness. I started the engine, and as the headlights cut through the darkness, I made myself a silent vow. If she could stand there and strip me of my dignity, then she had forfeited the right to enjoy the fruits of my labor. She had made her choice to belittle me, and I would make mine to remind her that my face might not matter to her, but my sacrifices did. The silence in my car on the drive home was louder than the music and laughter I had left behind. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached, but I didn't ease my hold. It wasn't the kind of anger that made you want to scream or slam your fist against something. It was colder, heavier, the kind that settled in your chest and spread like ice through your veins. Every turn of the wheel replayed her words in my head, old and ugly, as if my own daughter had rehearsed them not for humor, but for humiliation. I had been reduced to a caricature of myself, stripped of dignity in front of everyone I knew. I thought of the relatives who sat at those tables, the co-workers who shook my hand earlier that evening, and the neighbors who had traveled far to celebrate. All of them laughed. All of them saw me as nothing more than a joke. When I pulled into the driveway, the house loomed in front of me, but it felt foreign, almost hostile, as if even the walls knew I had been diminished. I sat in the car for several minutes, staring at the porch light flickering faintly in the darkness, wondering how I could ever step back into the life I had built knowing that my daughter had crushed me in front of the world. I thought about going inside, pouring myself a drink, or distracting myself with television, but I couldn't move. My body refused to follow simple commands because my mind was still in that hall, still hearing the eruption of laughter that had swallowed me whole. For the first time in years, I felt like an outsider in my own life, unwelcome in the very spaces I had worked tirelessly to provide. Eventually, I forced myself inside, but the quiet of the house did nothing to ease the storm inside me. I wandered from room to room, each corner holding some memory of my daughter. The kitchen where I had made her favorite meals after school, the living room where I had watched her open Christmas presents with wide-eyed joy, the hallway where her laughter used to echo late into the night. Every memory felt tainted now, painted over with the sneer in her voice as she mocked me in front of everyone. I sat on the couch, hunched forward with my elbows on my knees, staring at the blank television screen as if it might offer answers. But all I could see reflected back was a man who had been taken for granted too many times, a man whose love had been mistaken for weakness. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my wife absent beside me at the wedding still, while I battled with my own thoughts. My mind circled endlessly around the same questions. Why would she say that? Why would my wife laugh? Why didn't anyone stop her? There were no answers. Only waves of humiliation followed by anger, and then the suffocating numbness of betrayal. At some point, I sat up, swung my legs over the side of the bed, and rubbed my face, feeling the weight of exhaustion but unable to close my eyes. It was in that silence, in that sleepless night, that a decision began to form, not out of pettiness, but out of the raw need to reclaim what little respect I still had for myself. By morning, I had convinced myself of one thing. If she didn't value me as her father, then she had no right to value the sacrifices I made for her. Every bill I had covered for that wedding, every expense I had paid for her honeymoon, suddenly felt like another layer of mockery. She had taken my money with open hands, but stripped me of dignity with a careless joke. I brewed myself a cup of coffee, staring at the steam rising in the morning light, and told myself, no more. If she wanted to laugh at me, then she would laugh without the benefit of my wallet cushioning her life. That was when I knew what I had to do. The first call was to the travel agency. My voice was calm, measured, but inside I was shaking, not from fear, but from the strange mix of liberation and bitterness. I explained that I wanted to cancel the honeymoon tickets I had purchased. The woman on the other end asked if I was sure, her tone polite but tinged with surprise, and I said yes without hesitation. The click of her keyboard felt like justice being typed into existence. Then came the hotel reservations, then the catering balance. One by one, I unraveled the financial web I had built for her big day, stripping away the safety net she had assumed would always be there. With each confirmation of cancellation, I felt a little lighter, as though I was reclaiming pieces of myself that had been taken for granted too long. When the inevitable call from her came, I was ready. Her voice was sharp, dripping with fury. "Dad, what the hell did you do? They're saying the tickets are canceled. What is wrong with you?" I let her scream, her words tumbling over one another, full of entitlement and outrage. She didn't apologize, not once. Instead, she doubled down, hurling insults, calling me petty, bitter, selfish. I listened in silence, my face calm though my heart pounded with the sting of her venom. When she finally paused, waiting for me to explain, I spoke softly, almost too softly for her to hear. "You don't like me because of my face, remember? So you don't have the right to spend my cash." Before she could fire back, I hung up and blocked her number. For a long moment, I sat there staring at my phone, my reflection dim on the black screen. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vengeful. I just felt free. For the first time in years, I wasn't bending backward to please her, wasn't sacrificing my pride for her comfort. I had drawn a line in the sand, one I should have drawn long ago. And as harsh as it may have seemed to outsiders, it was the only way I knew to reclaim my dignity. I had walked away from that wedding hall, and now I was walking away from the chains of her disrespect. The hours after I blocked her number were some of the strangest I had lived through. I wasn't angry in the way most people might expect. There was no urge to yell, no pounding fists on the table, no explosion of rage. Instead, it was an eerie calm, as if I had finally stopped fighting against a tide that had been pulling me under for years. For so long, I had convinced myself that fatherhood meant endless patience, sacrifice without question, and forgiveness without limits. But that day, in the aftermath of her words, I realized that being a father did not make me a punching bag, nor did it obligate me to bankroll a child who mocked me. Canceling those payments wasn't revenge. It was a declaration that my dignity had a price, and it could not be bargained away. I remember sitting at the dining room table that morning, receipts spread out in front of me like battlefield maps. Each one represented a choice I had made, a gift I had given her with love, never asking for gratitude, only for respect. The catering bill, the floral arrangements, the dress alterations, even the down payment on the honeymoon, all of it had come from my pocket, money I had set aside over years of careful saving. I had done it gladly, because I thought the day would honor us both, a father and a daughter stepping proudly into new chapters. But looking at those receipts now, I saw only my own foolishness. I had paid for a stage where I was cast as the fool, and I couldn't let that stand unchallenged. The first time she called me after I blocked her, it was from her husband's phone. I recognized the number immediately and felt a bitter amusement that she had resorted to using someone else to try and reach me. When I picked up, her voice was already raised, brimming with fury. "Dad, what the hell is wrong with you? Do you know how embarrassing this is? We're at the airport, and they're telling us our tickets don't exist anymore." Her words were sharp, each syllable laced with indignation, as if I were the one humiliating her now. I listened quietly, letting her vent, the irony not lost on me that she felt embarrassed only when money was on the line, not when she stood on that stage and mocked me in front of hundreds. I gave her the courtesy of silence until she paused, waiting for me to explain myself, maybe even to apologize. But when I spoke, my words were steady, almost too calm. You laughed at me, in front of everyone. You didn't just make a joke, you mocked me, as though I was nothing more than a punchline. And then you expect to turn around and use the money I worked for, the money you mocked me with, to celebrate? No, not anymore. If my face disgusts you, then so does my wallet. You can't insult one and expect to enjoy the other. I didn't raise my voice, and that seemed to enrage her more. You're pathetic, she spat back. Do you know how childish you sound? You're ruining my honeymoon. All because you can't take a joke? Everyone laughed. It wasn't that serious. You're just bitter and old, and now you're trying to control me with money. Well, guess what? You can't stop me from living my life. The venom in her tone was startling, though I shouldn't have been surprised. She had learned long ago that she could push and I would bend, but not this time. This time, I refused to play the role of the weak father who swallowed every insult. Before she could say another word, I pressed the button, cutting off her voice mid-sentence, and blocked the number. The peace that followed was heavier than silence. It was freedom clothed in finality. I sat back in my chair, staring at the quiet phone, and realized that something irreversible had happened. She wasn't just my daughter anymore. She was a stranger who had shown me her true face. And as painful as that was to admit, it also felt strangely relieving. I had always told myself that my love for her was unconditional, but maybe that had been a lie I told to keep myself from confronting the truth. Love without respect is not love at all. It is servitude. And I had served long enough. Later that day, my wife came home, her face tense with worry, her words hesitant. She called me. She said softly, placing her bag on the counter. She said you canceled everything. Is that true? Her eyes searched mine, pleading for an explanation that might soften the edges of what she had already heard. I didn't dodge the question. I looked her straight in the eye and said, yes. Every payment, every ticket, every reservation. I canceled it all. The shock on her face quickly melted into frustration, her voice rising as she protested. But why? She's young. She didn't mean it like that. It was just a joke. That word again, joke. As if reducing me to a public spectacle could be brushed off as harmless humor. I stood from my chair, my voice steady but firm. She called me old and ugly in front of everyone we know, and you laughed. You laughed with them. Do you have any idea how that felt? How it tore me apart? And now, after everything, after she mocked me and you sided with her by staying silent, you expect me to keep funding her happiness? No. She lost that privilege the moment she humiliated me. My wife's eyes welled with tears, but I didn't falter. I had drawn the line, and I would not be crossing it. That night, as I lay in bed, the weight of my decision settled over me. It wasn't easy, cutting ties like that, especially with my only child. But every time I replayed the scene in my head, the laughter echoing like a chorus of betrayal, I knew I had made the right choice. I wasn't punishing her. I was protecting myself. And maybe, just maybe, teaching her that actions had consequences. The sting of humiliation had forged a new resolve in me. Never again would I allow my role as father to be twisted into a license for disrespect. The days that followed were some of the hardest in my marriage, because the silence in the house was louder than any argument we had ever had. My wife and I moved around each other like strangers, each step, each glance loaded with tension that neither of us dared to break in the first hours. She wanted me to undo what I had done, to pick up the phone, apologize to our daughter, and reinstate the payments I had canceled. But I couldn't bring myself to do it, not when every image of the wedding replayed in my mind like a cruel theater reel. My daughter's smirk, the laughter of the crowd, and most painfully, the sight of my wife laughing with them, it haunted me. I felt like I was living in two houses at once, the one we physically occupied and the one in my mind, full of betrayal and echoes of mockery. On the second evening after the wedding, my wife finally broke the silence. We were sitting at the dinner table, the food between us untouched, and she looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice trembling as if she already knew the answer but dreaded hearing it. I set down my fork, leaned back in my chair, and met her gaze. Because I'm tired of being laughed at in my own family. I'm tired of giving and giving only to be treated like I don't matter. She humiliated me, and you let her. Do you have any idea how that felt? My words came out harsher than I intended, but the truth was sharp, and I wasn't going to dull it for her comfort. She flinched, her hands curling into fists on the table. It was a joke, she whispered again, clinging to that same fragile excuse. But this time, I shook my head. No, a joke is when you laugh with someone, not at them. A joke is meant to share joy, not to strip someone of dignity. What she did wasn't a joke. It was cruelty disguised as humor, and you know it. And you laughed along. Do you know what that told me? That you valued the approval of the crowd more than the respect of your husband. That cut deeper than anything she said. For the first time, her face softened with guilt, and she looked away, unable to meet my eyes. The argument stretched into the night, our voices rising and falling as we circled the same wound. She begged me to reconsider, to reach out to our daughter before the rift grew too wide to bridge. She's still our child, she said desperately, her hands trembling as she reached for mine. We can't just throw her away over this. I pulled my hand back gently, shaking my head. She threw me away first. She took everything I had given her, all the sacrifices, all the years of support, and she reduced me to a punchline. Respect is not something I can beg for, and love without respect is poison. If we let her believe she can treat me that way and still reap the rewards, then we teach her nothing. I won't be a part of that. Her tears flowed freely then, her voice breaking as she accused me of being stubborn, of letting my pride ruin our family. I wanted to tell her that pride had nothing to do with it, that this was about dignity, about drawing a line so deep it could never be erased. But in her eyes, I was already the villain, the father who had canceled his daughter's honeymoon, the husband who refused to forgive. We went to bed without speaking, our backs turned to one another, the weight of unsaid words pressing down on us like a second mattress. I stared into the dark, listening to her quiet sobs, torn between anger and sorrow, but unwilling to compromise the stand I had taken. In the days that followed, the tension didn't ease. My wife would sigh heavily as she passed me in the kitchen, or linger by the window with her phone clutched tightly in her hand, waiting for a call from our daughter that no longer came. I could feel her resentment growing, simmering like a pot left on low heat. But I also knew she understood me, even if she didn't want to admit it. Every now and then, I caught her staring at me with a mixture of anger and regret, as though she couldn't decide whether to blame me or herself. And perhaps that was fair. Perhaps we were both to blame, each of us caught in the crossfire of a daughter's cruelty and a father's resolve. It was on the fourth night that I gave her the ultimatum, not out of spite, but because I could no longer bear the limbo we were living in. We were sitting in the living room, the glow of the lamp casting long shadows across the floor, when I turned to her and spoke firmly. I can't keep doing this. You need to decide where you stand. Are you with me, or are you with her? Because I won't live in a house where my wife sees me as the villain for demanding respect. I won't share my life with someone who thinks it's okay for our daughter to humiliate me. The words hung in the air like a blade, and I could see the shock in her eyes. She tried to protest, to tell me that it wasn't that simple, that a mother couldn't simply choose between her husband and her child. But I shook my head, cutting her off. It is that simple. Because this isn't about choosing between me and her. It's about choosing between respect and disrespect. If you choose her, then you're choosing to justify her actions, to laugh at me again the next time she mocks me. And I won't live like that. Not anymore. My voice was steady, but inside, my heart pounded, terrified of what her answer might be. For a long moment, she said nothing. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the way her hands twisted nervously in her lap, torn between the bond of motherhood and the loyalty of a wife. Finally, with a trembling voice, she whispered, "I don't want to lose you." Her words cracked something in me, a mixture of relief and sorrow. She chose me, yes, but I knew it came at a cost. The bond between mother and daughter had been fractured, and I was the hammer that had delivered the blow. That night, as we lay in bed, she curled closer to me, her body shaking with silent sobs. I held her, but my own eyes remained open, staring into the darkness. I wondered if I had saved my marriage only to destroy our family, or if perhaps the family had already been broken the moment laughter filled that wedding hall. All I knew was that there was no going back. A line had been drawn, and we were both standing on my side of it now, whether she truly wanted to or not. When my wife whispered that she didn't want to lose me, it should have been a moment of relief, but instead it felt bittersweet, almost hollow. I had forced her to choose, and while she had chosen me, I knew the choice had come at the expense of her bond with our daughter. That weighed on me heavily, but not heavily enough to make me change my mind. I had spent too many years bending, compromising, and swallowing disrespect in the name of peace. This time, I needed more than peace. I needed validation, acknowledgement that my pain was real and that my boundaries mattered. My wife's decision gave me that, even if the price was steep. I lay awake that night listening to her breathing, thinking about how the fractures in our family now stretched far wider than I had ever imagined. The following morning, she approached me cautiously in the kitchen. Her eyes were swollen from crying, and her voice was soft, fragile in a way I rarely heard. I shouldn't have laughed, she admitted, her gaze fixed on the floor rather than me. In that moment, I thought it was harmless. Everyone else was laughing, and I didn't want to make it awkward. But I see now how much it hurt you. I see how wrong I was. Those words, though quiet, struck me more deeply than I expected. For days, I had been waiting for her to acknowledge my humiliation, to stop brushing it aside as a joke. Hearing her finally admit it felt like a small balm on a gaping wound. I nodded slowly, my jaw tight, and whispered, "It wasn't just about the laughter. It was about feeling like I was standing alone." She reached across the counter, placing her hand on mine, tentative but genuine. "You weren't alone. I was there, but I failed you. I should have defended you, even if it meant standing against our daughter in front of everyone. I didn't, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life." Her words carried the weight of remorse, but also a kind of resolve I hadn't seen from her in years. For the first time since the wedding, I felt like we were on the same side, not divided by loyalty or fear of confrontation. It didn't erase the pain, but it built a fragile bridge where there had only been a chasm before. I squeezed her hand gently, a silent acknowledgement that while I hadn't forgiven easily, I recognized her effort to make things right. Yet, even as my wife and I began to mend our side of the wound, the rift with my daughter only deepened. She hadn't called again after I blocked her, but I heard through mutual relatives that she had been venting her anger to anyone who would listen. They said she accused me of being vindictive, of ruining her special day and her honeymoon out of spite. Some even repeated her claim that I was jealous of her happiness. The absurdity of that accusation made me laugh bitterly to myself. Jealous? Of the child I had given everything to, who had turned around and mocked me in front of hundreds. If anything, I envied the simple respect other fathers seemed to enjoy from their children. But jealousy of her? No. I felt only disappointment, only the sting of betrayal. One evening, my brother called me after hearing the gossip. His tone was cautious, but probing. "I heard what happened," he said. "She's telling everyone you canceled the honeymoon out of revenge, that you embarrassed her worse than she embarrassed you." His words carried an edge, as if testing me, gauging whether there was truth in her narrative. I let out a weary sigh, leaning back in my chair. Do you think it's revenge to stop funding someone who spits on you? Do you think it's revenge to draw a line after being mocked in front of your entire family? There was silence on the other end for a long moment before he finally said, "No. Honestly, I don't blame you. But you know how people are. They'll take her side because she's younger, because it's easier to paint you as bitter." His words didn't surprise me. I had already sensed the tide of opinion shifting, but I refused to let that shake my conviction. My wife overheard part of the call, and after I hung up, she came to me with worry etched on her face. "They're making you out to be the bad guy," she said quietly. "Everyone thinks you went too far." I looked at her, my voice steady but tired. "Let them think what they want. I'm done trying to please people who laugh at my expense. If protecting my dignity makes me the villain in their story, then so be it. I won't apologize for demanding respect." Saying those words out loud gave me a strange strength, as if I had finally shed the last traces of guilt that had been clinging to me. I didn't need the world's approval, only my own. Over time, my wife's stance grew stronger too. At first, she tiptoed between us, hoping for reconciliation, But gradually, she seemed to realize that reconciliation wasn't possible, at least not without a genuine apology from our daughter. One evening, she sat beside me on the couch and said, "I called her today. I told her she owes you an apology. I told her until she gives it, I can't support what she's doing." Her words surprised me, not because she said them, but because she meant them. It was the first time she had actively defended me to our daughter, the first time she had chosen my dignity over her desire to keep the family intact at all costs. For the first time in weeks, I felt the burden on my chest lighten just a little. Still, even with my wife by my side, I couldn't shake the sadness that lingered beneath the surface. This wasn't how I had imagined the years ahead. I had pictured holidays with my daughter and her new family, shared dinners, grandchildren running through the house, laughter that united us instead of dividing us. But instead, I found myself bracing for more gossip, more whispers, more coldness from the very people I had once trusted. It wasn't the future I wanted, but it was the one I had been given. And as painful as it was, I told myself I would rather endure this loneliness than return to a life where my dignity was negotiable. When my wife and I finally talked about the future, she asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Do you think she'll ever come back?" Her voice was hopeful, tinged with sadness, but I answered honestly. Not unless she learns what respect means. Not unless she understands that money doesn't buy forgiveness. The silence that followed was heavy, but also clarifying. We both knew the chances were slim. Still, I wasn't angry anymore. I had accepted the reality. My wife had chosen me, and together we would move forward, even if it meant leaving our daughter behind until she chose differently. In the weeks after everything unraveled, I found myself moving differently through the world, as though a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had finally been lifted. For years, I had allowed myself to live in a cycle of giving and forgiving, convincing myself that family ties demanded endless sacrifice, no matter how one-sided or painful. But the wedding changed me. It was as if my daughter's words, cruel and thoughtless as they were, forced me to see myself clearly for the first time in decades. I wasn't just a father, a provider, a man who lived to serve others. I was a human being with dignity, feelings, and limits. And once I realized that, there was no way to go back. I told myself each morning as I poured my coffee, I am done being the butt of anyone's joke, even my own child's. At first, people tried to make me feel guilty. Some relatives called, urging me to reconsider, painting me as the unreasonable one. She didn't mean it, they said. You know how young people are, always joking, always trying to be funny. I would listen quietly, my lips pressed together, and when they finished, I always gave the same answer. If it was only a joke, why didn't anyone laugh with me instead of at me? If it was harmless, why do I still feel humiliated every time I think about it? Their silence told me everything. They hadn't considered the weight of my perspective because they never had to. They assumed I would keep absorbing the blows, like always. But I was finished being their sponge for disrespect. I hung up those calls lighter than before, unbothered by whether they understood. My wife, to her credit, stood firmer by me each passing day. At first, she had been reluctant, torn between the bond of mother and child. But once she admitted her fault and saw the wound for what it was, she seemed to harden in her resolve. One evening, she came to me with her phone in her hand, tears brimming in her eyes. "She called again," she said softly, "but only to insult you. I told her I won't listen to it anymore." That moment, I saw the shift in her. She was no longer trying to mediate, no longer trying to justify. She had chosen her stance, and while it broke her heart to clash with her daughter, she finally understood what I had been fighting for. Not revenge, not money, but respect. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't standing alone. Still, late at night, when the house was quiet and the weight of the day pressed down on me, I would lie awake thinking about the daughter I once knew. The little girl who ran into my arms after school, who begged me to push her higher on the swings, who cried on my shoulder when the world was too harsh for her tender heart. Where had she gone? Had I failed her somewhere along the way? Or had she simply grown into someone who saw me as disposable? These questions haunted me, but I refused to let them consume me. I realized that no matter how many answers I searched for, none would justify the way she had treated me. And if she couldn't find it within herself to see the man who had raised her with sacrifice and love, then perhaps the loss was hers more than mine. The biggest revelation came not in confrontation, but in reflection. One morning, I stood in front of the mirror, staring at the face my daughter had mocked as old and ugly. I studied the lines etched into my skin, the graying hair, the tired eyes, and for the first time, I didn't feel shame. Those features were the proof of years lived, of burdens carried, of sacrifices made so she could stand where she stood. They weren't flaws, they were medals, earned in silence, unseen by many but undeniable to me. I whispered to my reflection, if she cannot respect this face, then she does not deserve the hands that built her future. In that moment, I felt a strange peace wash over me, the kind that comes only from accepting yourself fully, scars and all. Of course, people still whispered. At gatherings, I could feel the sideways glances, the hushed voices, the weight of judgment hanging in the air. Some painted me as cruel, others as bitter, a man who had gone too far. But I no longer flinched at their opinions. What mattered was not how they saw me, but how I saw myself. I had spent too much of my life trying to live up to others' expectations, bending myself into shapes that pleased them but left me hollow. Now, I stood straight, unbent, unbroken, and unapologetic. If that made me the villain in their story, so be it. In mine, I was the man who finally chose himself. Over time, my home became a quieter place, not just in sound but in spirit. The absence of my daughter's voice echoed in the spaces she used to fill, but I learned to live with it. My wife and I rebuilt our routines, slowly mending the cracks left behind by conflict. Sometimes, she would grow quiet, lost in thought, and I knew she was thinking of her daughter. But she never pressured me anymore, never tried to coax me into forgiveness I wasn't ready to give. Instead, she would take my hand and squeeze it, a silent promise that no matter how painful this new reality was, she was with me. That solidarity was worth more than anything I had lost. Looking back, I don't regret what I did. It wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't the path most would choose, but it was the only way I could reclaim my dignity. I may have lost a daughter, but I gained something I hadn't realized I was missing: boundaries. Clear, unshakable boundaries that told the world, and myself, that my worth was not up for debate. My daughter may one day realize what she threw away, or she may not. That choice is hers. But as for me, I am done giving love that is met with mockery. I will pour myself into the people who see me, who value me, who cherish what I bring. And my daughter, as much as it pains me to say, is not one of those people. In the end, I came to accept that family is not defined by blood alone. Family is built on respect, on love that doesn't humiliate, on loyalty that doesn't waver in front of a crowd. My daughter chose to laugh, to strip me of dignity for a cheap joke, and in doing so, she showed me that the bond one thought was unbreakable had already been fragile. Now, I live with clarity. I am better off with fewer people around me, so long as those people see me as a man, not a punchline. My boundaries are my peace, and in them, I have found freedom. So that was my truth, raw and unpolished. I stood my ground, and it cost me my daughter, but I walked away with my dignity intact. Some say I went too far. Others say I did what any man should. But what do you think? If you were in my shoes, would you have forgiven her and let it slide, or would you have drawn the line as I did? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I really want to hear how you see it. And if this story spoke to you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real stories that dive deep into family and betrayal.